The announcement of the creation of the Live Golf League rocked the golf world and left fans wondering what the future of golf holds. Hi, my name is Luke Heyer, and the topic of my Persuasion speech will be the PGA Tour and Live Golf League dilemma. In this speech, I will discuss the ongoing fiasco in the golf world involving the creation of the new Live Golf League. By the end of the speech, I hope to have persuaded you into supporting the PGA Tour, and more specifically the loyal Tour players, rather than the nefariously funded Live Golf League. The PGA Tour, or Professional Golfers Association, has existed as a pinnacle of competitive golf for over 5 decades. There are other golfing tours such as the Korn Ferry Tour, which could be characterized as a minor league tour for the PGA, and there is also the European and Asian Tour. These tours have talented players and a respectful audience size, but no other tour can be compared to the elite and immense PGA Tour. This was true until a new tour was announced to the world. The new golf league is called Live Golf, and contrasts with the PGA Tour in several ways. This league is not seen as a threat to the PGA Tour until it offered $1 million and even some $100 million contracts to several of the PGA Tour's most popular players. The new Live Golf League is funded by the Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, and this is where a major aspect of the dilemma arises. The Live Golf League was created in 2021 and had their first year of competition in 2022. When the league was announced, there was a general sentiment from golf fans that it was not a big deal and would not affect the PGA Tour. This was true until some players began leaving the PGA for the new Live League. Author Dylan Dethier writes, "The PGA Tour is frantically seeking to secure its players' loyalty and by extension the Tour's future. On the other side, Live Golf was writing an announcement that would serve as an introductory paragraph to a new chapter in the sport, one that would put serious challenge in the decades of the Tour's supremacy." End quote. Once players started leaving, the PGA Tour was forced to take the new Live League seriously and develop a plan to secure the Tour and its players. As reports and articles began to surface, more information came out about the new Live League and the format, as well as the supporters and administration of the league. Dethier writes, quote, "The Breakaway League, funded by Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund and helmed by Tour legend Greg Norman, still consisted of just a half a dozen employees and zero public presence, but promises totaling hundreds of millions of dollars had turned them into a serious player on golf's world stage." End quote. With the league's funding coming from Saudi Arabia's PIF, there was no doubt that it would be a serious competitor to the PGA Tour, just based on the amount of money and resources it was given. The new Live League, with its Saudi Arabian backing, offered contracts to players in hopes that they would leave the PGA Tour. One by one, the Live League began to grow its roster and project seriousness of their new league. Live Golf, in order to secure its roster and offer an entertaining golf product to viewers, sent out 10 and even 11-figure contracts to some of the biggest names on the PGA Tour. Initially, most of the PGA Tour players expressed their loyalty to the Tour, and they were not interested in leaving for some new, unknown, and unexperienced league. Dethier writes, quote, "Rory McIlroy and John Rahm and Collin Morikawa pledged their allegiance to the PGA Tour, denouncing Live's legitimacy and a worrisome source of its funding," end quote. These were 3 of the biggest names in the sport, and their statements gave assurances to the PGA and its fans that the Tour would stay intact. However, Dustin Johnson was the first big name to leave the PGA for Live. Quote, "Johnson's departure signaled it was on. Live was for real," end quote. Dethier. Johnson had been one of the winningest players on the Tour in the past couple of years, and so it was a big blow and led to a snowball effect of players leaving. Shortly after, one of the biggest names in golf, Phil Mickelson, announced he was joining Live. Dethier quotes Mickelson when talking about the reasons for him leaving. Quote, "This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reshape how the PGA Tour operates," end quote. Though most fans believe Mickelson left the Tour for the big paycheck that Live offered him, there is some truth in his words. The PGA Tour has its shortcomings. Based on how much income the Tour generates annually, the players are not receiving compensation they felt was fair based on how much they bring to the league. The only way to make money on the Tour is to make what is called the cut. PGA has around 30 events annually that happen consecutively every weekend throughout the Tour schedule. Every player in the field, which usually consists of 150 players or so, plays Thursday and Friday at that week's event. On Friday, based on how the players scored, there is what is called a cut, where half of the players are eliminated and will not play on Saturday and Sunday. And if you do not make the cut, you do not receive any compensation. The PGA has increased its purse amounts for the events so that players who make the cut receive more compensation. The PGA Tour announced that every player that left the PGA for the LIV League was subsequently suspended by the PGA, and this led to a lawsuit being filed by 11 players and remarks by others that their unhappiness with this move from the tour. Death Year writes, quote, in early August, after 11 defectors filed a lawsuit against the tour for wrongful suspension of their tour membership, the tenor changed. On Twitter, tour player Joel Dahman summed up his purest feelings best, saying, quote, it sounds like some people want their cake and to eat it too, end quote. What Dahman meant by the quote was that it was hubris to believe that it was all right for the LIV players to take massive checks to leave the PGA Tour and still expect to compete in the PGA Tour events where other players rely on placing high and to receive their compensation for the week. The LIV League's funding coming from Saudi Arabia is the most controversial aspect of the whole dilemma. The league is backed directly by Saudi's PIF. The term public in PIF is a little misleading, as the decision to fund the league was made by the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman. There is a common consensus from those who are knowledgeable about the situation that the Crown Prince sees the league as a hobby and a way to disrupt the American-dominated PGA Tour. When the news broke that Phil Mickelson, who we talked about before, was joining the LIV League, he made some interesting comments. Mickelson, when referencing the Saudis, said that they were, quote, scary mother effers, Death Year writes. He also quotes Mickelson saying, we know they killed Washington Post scribe and U.S. resident Jamal Khashoggi and have a horrible record on human rights. They execute people over there for being gay. Knowing all this, why would I consider joining the new league? Because this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reshape how the PGA Tour operates. Phil Mickelson, recognized as one of the greatest golfers in PGA Tour history, openly discusses some of the terrible human rights violations Saudi Arabia has been complicit in and justifies his support for the league by saying that it will help the shortcomings of the PGA Tour. Mickelson talked about the murder of the American resident and journalist Jamal Khashoggi by the Saudi Arabian government. Jamal Khashoggi was murdered by the Saudi Arabian government while investigating their violations on human rights. Potter emphasizes, quote, the Human Rights Watch report reported that Saudi Arabia authorities continued arbitrary arrests, trials, and convictions of peaceful dissidents. They discriminated against religious minorities and sent people to prison for criticizing the authorities, end quote. Saudi Arabia has an extensive history on human rights violations, including prosecuting peaceful protesters. Capmark writes, in reference to the PGA Tour lawyers' defense in the 11-player lawsuit, quote, given the Saudis a decent record on human rights, it is programmatic determination to use the sport as a vehicle to rinse and launder its misdeeds. This was not something that the lawyers for LIV Golf were hoping for, end quote. Capmark accuses Saudi Arabia of sports washing. This is because he sees the Saudi Arabian government as trying to invest in sports like golf to improve their image and to relieve their international stained reputation for human rights violations. The tour has its shortcomings, but they pale in comparison to that of the new LIV Golf League. There have been efforts by the PGA to increase its purse size for players so they can earn more compensation for their skills. And the general sentiment from fans is that if players wish to take a paycheck to compete in an unserious and nefariously funded league, that is fine, but they should not be able to compete in the league that they just left for players who did not leave rely on making the cut for their livelihoods. The LIV League, receiving its funding from the Saudi Arabian government, leaves a black eye in the perspective of the league. With their record on human rights violations and the murder of an American resident journalist, it is clear why most golf fans have spoken out against the league and continue to champion the PGA Tour. There's also questions as to whether the Saudi Arabian government is interested in this league for honest business reasons, or because they wish to use the league for, quote, sports washing and cleaning up their government's reputation. I hope I have persuaded the audience to support the PGA Tour and its players over the nefariously funded and unserious LIV League that has caused a fracture in the professional golf world. Thank you for listening.